Thank you very much, Jonathan, and a big thank you really to HLB Mann, Judd, to Holman, Webb, to FAMS and to the Commonwealth Bank as well for hosting this event and what is a great series of events. So in terms of what we've been doing and what we were established to do, well, the objects that the ACNC has really came about as a result of a lot of lobbying from the sector, a lot of representations about the precise wording, because it was very important, I think, to charities that actually what was created was something that was fit for purpose, that was going to be helpful, that wasn't going to be a tick box, a sort of gotcha type regulator. And so we were given three objects. The first is obviously to promote public trust and confidence. Public trust is so important because it underpins charitable giving, it underpins volunteering, and we know that although trust and confidence is high in charities, it doesn't take a lot for people to start to think, well, they're all like that, and I'm going to stop contributing. Very importantly, though, we were given an object which was about really supporting a sustainable, independent and vibrant not-for-profit sector. And so a lot of the work that we do around advice, around guidance, around support is really in that area, and that's where a great deal of our time and effort goes. And the third was about reducing the regulatory duplication, a recognition that actually this is a sector that isn't under-regulated. In most areas it's grossly over-regulated, but the regulation is duplicative, it's incoherent, and it doesn't actually achieve the purpose. So it was really to try and act as a catalyst to drive some of the change that the sector's been calling for over a couple of decades. In terms of some of the principal activities, well, firstly, we think that accountability and transparency is really important, and that's really important if we are to actually increase trust and confidence in the sector. And one of the ways we've gone about trying to achieve this is through the creation of the charity register and the population of the register with information that charities have been providing to us. And of course, that's vitally important. So when we talk about reporting, we don't think of it as charities producing reports to us. We think of it as charities actually making their information available to the public, to the community, to potential funders, to donors. And really the purpose of the register is to make easily accessible information freely available to all. And a lot of what we've been doing is to do that. So you will have heard in the media about revoking charities. The process we've been going through is really to identify charities that have wound up and to remove their details from the register. Of course, what's important really is not only charities that are registering, but actually is this increasing the register? Are there already charities that are currently doing that work? You know, do we need more charities? Is a lot of the debate that goes on. And so with the register, we're starting to be able to have conversations with people setting up new organisations to say, did you know there's already 5 children's charities doing this very work in Manley? Did you know in Geelong there's already 8 animal refuges, and actually there are ways of supporting existing organisations or setting a sub-fund up with a community foundation or whatever that can enable you to achieve your purpose without actually having set up an organisation that you've got to run in perpetuity. And the process we're now going through is identifying those charities that have still 2 years in not filed anything for 2013 and not filed anything for 2014. Now, we haven't had post return from these, we haven't had people contacting us saying this organisation's wound up, but we think a lot of them probably will have wound up. So in terms of some of the work, we've got over 200 pages of guidance and materials on the website. We've got some training videos. So there's a whole load of material that is constantly evolving. And we now have verified information on the register from 47,000 charities. What's interesting as well, which you may not be aware of, if you go to the register, you can actually see the governing documents now of an awful lot of charities. So we've published over 30,000 sets of governing rules of charities, and there's over 12,000 sets of accounts of medium and large organisations on there. And by the end of June, that will be significantly greater. So in terms of the information that will be available, it'll be significantly higher than that.
And thanks very much to everybody for that very kind and very warm welcome. And one of the problems that I face in giving an account of where we are today is that it's a bit historical. I think I need to give you a bit of account of where things started off. And you know that for me, as has already been said, my grandmother used to say that being a good snooker player was the sign of a wasted youth. And I could say that being a good political campaigner is similarly the sign of a wasted youth. But I did actually end up putting some of those skills, I think, to relatively good use. But it does, I think I like to start the story with, with a very subjective point, the emotional age of a 5-year-old, where everything is about me. So I'll start it very subjectively and just say that it's important to understand disability because unlike a lot of other areas of philanthropy and interest and charity, disability has certain unique characteristics. And one of those unique characteristics is I think, especially common to most of us here, I think, as Australians. I often tease that perhaps someone should write a PhD on the Australian attitude to disability because, in a sense, if you kind of look at the long history or the short history, until very recently, Australia hasn't done very well in disability. In fact, if you think about the way Australians have tended to think of themselves, we are a competitive group of people by nature, even though we pretend we're not. And we like to think of ourselves as doing much better than other people, other societies. And if you think it through, when we talk about areas of social policy, any time in the last 20 years, Australians would have always thought and pointed to how Australia did, for example, in education. And although things are a bit more challenged now in a few areas in education results and the international standards, traditionally and typically Australia performs these days still in most of the standard testing around about, well, certainly the top 5, maybe sometimes when it's not too good in the top 10. But for a long time, in the top 3 or better in education, in science knowledge, in numeracy, in number of percentage of persons going to post-secondary education, all those sorts of things. We're a top performer. In health, the much maligned health system, which we all knock all the time and all rubbish and go on about how bad it is. But in fact, if you look at all the numbers, we have probably the first, second or third best health system in the world and have had consistently in terms of outcomes for about the last 25 years. If you go to the OECD figures on disability, you'll find that for the last 30 years, Australia has been consistently 25th or 26th or 27th out of 27 or 28. And that has been consistently the case for about 2 generations, really since they started collecting the numbers. And I think that's always been something that I kind of refer people to as an issue, like why I won't kind of spoil the day and advance my theory because I actually think there's a bit of a dark side as to why that might be the case. But I think it's very important that we do acknowledge that this is an area where, as a community, as a nation, we have not done well compared to our peer communities, the communities that we normally compare ourselves to internationally. But let me take you back to the subjective. I actually have a bit of a confession. When I was made the Minister for Disability Services back some long time ago now, stayed here in New South Wales, I was actually a reluctant disability minister. I didn't want to be the disability minister. Somebody said to me, look, we've got to have a meeting with some people who have been put off for the last couple of weeks or maybe months, because there'd been an election, there'd been all sorts of other people. The previous minister hadn't been able to see them, and it's really important you see them. And I said, well, who is it? And they said, oh, it's parents on this a parents group on the Central Coast. And I thought, well, better get in there. And I was thinking, parents, disability. Okay, well, they'll be concerned about autism programs in schools. They'll be interested in wheelchair access to playgrounds. They'll be interested in performance spaces having accessibility. They'll be interested in, programs, special programs for kids in schools. And thinking out aloud, they'll probably be interested in school buses being able to do that. that sort of, and thinking all that sort of through, just around, what it'll be about. Walked into the room and sat down and looked up and saw a whole bunch of people in their 70s and 80s. And I thought to myself, this is a bit strange, and not knowing what to say, thinking that all of the 3 minutes of prep I'd done, thinking through what this meeting would be about, was going to go up the spout. I said, well, this is your meeting, tell me what it's about. So an older gentleman, as I said, he was, I think he was into his 80s, jumped up first and he said, well, Minister, what I'd like to know is my wife, well, she died of overwork about 18 months ago, and she was 78 and I'm 81, and I want to know what's going to happen to my 51-year-old Down syndrome daughter when I pass away. And I obviously couldn't answer the question. And I suppose I prevaricated a bit, and the meeting went on, and many people had similar kind of concerns and similar sorts of issues. In fact, they were almost identical versions of the same story, one after another. And I had assumed, of course, that there was an answer to this question. And so I asked the people from the department after the meeting, well, what's the answer? And there isn't an answer, Minister. There isn't an answer. And I asked all my staff. I sort of went through the whole program and there was no answer. And I suppose that was the day I got it. That was the day, and I think that's the important thing that we wanted to sort of give everybody, the disability moment. The day when you've suddenly realised that all the kind of nice, easy life you have is not at all like that for people who have to support someone with a disability or someone who lives with a disability. And they need support if they're going to have the kinds of opportunities that you take for granted. And so I hadn't got it until then. And then I became quite committed to doing something about it. Wasn't easy, but one of the things we put in place here in New South Wales was a program called Stronger Together. And Stronger Together was basically had had a lot of aspects to it, but the three key things was, one, decanting as much finance and resources as we could possibly out of the government sector into the not-for-profit sector, simply because the not-for-profit sector did it better than the government did in terms of community-based support. Secondly, trying to kind of play catch-up with the really bad decisions that have been made, which was essentially that when in the, I suppose, what was it, the mid-80s, the New South Wales government, or late 80s actually, the Usher report and the Richmond report, decided to adopt a full deinstitutionalisation position. There have been little experiments with deinstitutionalisation way back in the 30s, as far back as the 30s, but once they adopted a full program of deinstitutionalisation, there were two things that didn't happen. One, they didn't deinstitutionalise the hard cases. So the people that needed deinstitutionalisation the most, they left them in institutions, like Pete Island and Stockton and so on. But more importantly, that was basically seen, or ended up becoming, a way in which the resources of government simply shifted away from disability. So we can close these institutions, but we don't substitute the support back into the community. We don't give any support back into the community. And so all this weight had gone back onto NGOs anyway, unsupported, oftentimes, or with very limited support. So the whole idea of Stronger Together was to increase massively the kind of series of block funding arrangements that had been put in place to give some support to NGOs and not-for-profits, and to continue to manage that. And to catch up with the idea that deinstitutionalisation really just hadn't happened properly, hadn't been done right in the first place. And the last but not least thing is to re-engineer the system so that the person who was at the centre of the system was the person with a disability, not everybody else, because a lot of the problem, which I had never understood, probably many here who are associated with the disability sector understand it as a second nature, which is that the problem with people with disability is not the people with a disability, it's everybody else. They're the people that put limitations on people, limit people's options, make judgments about what they should and should not do, and otherwise create the disability. So I suppose those things, again, were seen to be very much things that not-for-profits could do better than government in terms of placing people at the centre of the system.